The first gunshot reverberated through Willow Creek like thunder on a clear day, silencing the Saturday bustle and drawing every eye to the spectacle unfolding before the saloon. Zara Holloway stood frozen in the dusty street, her face streaked with tears and blood from a split lip, while her husband Frank lay writhing in the dirt, clutching his shoulder where the bullet had torn through flesh. "Next one goes through your heart," Zachariah Evans declared, his voice as steady as his smoking Colt revolver. The tall cowboy's usually gentle blue eyes had hardened to ice as he stared down at the man who'd been beating his wife in broad daylight. It was 1878 in the Montana Territory, and Willow Creek had seen its share of violence, but public wife-beating crossed a line even in the hardened frontier. Still, whispers rippled through the gathering crowd. "She probably burned his supper again. Man's got a right to discipline his household. That Evans fella's sticking his nose where it don't belong." Zachariah heard them, each muttered justification landing like acid on his conscience. He'd watched for weeks as Zara Holloway moved through town with downcast eyes, her sleeves always long despite the summer heat, making excuses for bruises that makeup couldn't hide. "She deserved what she got," Frank Holloway spat through gritted teeth, even as he bled into the dirt. "Disrespectful woman needs to be taught. No woman deserves pain," Zachariah cut him off, his voice ringing clear across the silent street. "Not from the man who vowed to cherish her, not from anyone." He stepped closer, positioning himself between Frank and Zara. "And if I ever see your hand raised to her again, I won't aim for your shoulder." Sheriff Miller pushed through the crowd, his weathered face grim. "Put the gun down, Evans. We don't settle things this way in town." "Seems like we don't settle them at all," Zachariah replied, though he slowly lowered his weapon. "This man's been beating his wife for months, and nobody's lifted a finger." The sheriff sighed. "Frank's been drinking again, I see. Mrs. Holloway, do you want to press charges against your husband?" Zara's eyes widened with fear as she looked between her groaning husband and the sheriff. I can't," she whispered. "She can stay at my sister's place," Zachariah said firmly, "until this is sorted. Now, listen here." Frank struggled to his feet, blood seeping through his fingers. "That's my wife, and what happens between us is nobody's business. It became my business when you decided to use her face as a punching bag in the middle of Main Street," Zachariah replied, his hand still resting on his holstered gun. The crowd murmured, uncomfortable with the confrontation, yet unwilling to disperse. Margaret Wilson, the mayor's wife, stepped forward unexpectedly. "I'll take Mrs. Holloway to Dr. Bennett's to have that lip looked at," she announced, moving to Zara's side and gently taking her arm. Sheriff Miller nodded, then turned to Frank. "You're coming with me. We'll get that shoulder patched up, and then you can cool your heels in a cell until tomorrow." "This ain't right," Frank protested. "A man can't even discipline his own wife without some cowboy playing hero." Zachariah's jaw tightened. "Discipline? Is that what you call it when you leave bruises on a woman half your size?" He turned to the gathered townsfolk. "And the rest of you, standing here making excuses for him, you're just as guilty." As the sheriff led Frank away, Zachariah approached Zara, removing his hat respectfully. "Mrs. Holloway, I apologize for intervening, but I couldn't stand by any longer." Zara's green eyes met his briefly before darting away. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "He'll be even angrier when he gets out." "You don't have to go back to him," Zachariah said softly. "There are other options." Margaret Wilson cleared her throat. "Let's get that lip scene too, Mrs. Holloway. We can discuss options afterward." As the women walked away, Zachariah felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Thomas Reed, owner of the general store where Zachariah purchased supplies for his small ranch outside of town. "You've made an enemy today, Evans," Thomas warned. "Frank Holloway has friends in this town, influential ones." "And his wife doesn't?" Zachariah asked bitterly. "She's an outsider, came here as a mail-order bride 2 years ago. No family, few friends." Thomas shook his head. "I'm not saying what you did was wrong, mind you, just that there will be consequences." Zachariah replaced his hat, squinting against the late afternoon sun. "There are always consequences for doing the right thing, Thomas. I can live with that. The question is, can this town live with itself for turning a blind eye for so long?" He He mounted his horse and rode toward his sister Martha's house on the edge of town, knowing he needed to prepare her for their potential guest. Martha had been widowed young when her husband died in a mining accident, leaving her with a modest house and an independent streak as wide as the Montana sky. Martha was hanging laundry when he arrived, her blonde hair the same shade as his tucked beneath a faded bonnet. She took one look at his expression and sighed. "What trouble have you found now, Zach?" He dismounted, tying his horse to the hitching post. "I shot Frank Holloway." Martha dropped the wet shirt she was holding. "You what?" "In the shoulder," he clarified. "He was beating his wife in front of the saloon. I couldn't just ride by." Martha picked up the fallen garment, brushing off dirt. "Of course you couldn't," she said softly. "Is Mrs. Holloway all right?" "No," Zachariah replied honestly. "She's not. And she needs a safe place to stay." Martha nodded, understanding immediately. "I'll make up the spare room." "Frank has friends in town," Zachariah warned. "It might cause trouble for you." Martha snorted. "I've been causing trouble in this town since I was old enough to walk. One more reason won't matter." She studied her brother's face. "Though I suspect there's more to your concern for Mrs. Holloway than simple decency." Zachariah frowned. "She's a married woman in trouble, that's all." Martha hummed skeptically. "Well, married or not, she deserves better than what she's got. You did right, Zach." Later that evening, as dusk painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, a knock came at Martha's door. Dr. Bennett stood on the porch with Zara Holloway, who carried a small bundle of possessions. "Mrs." Wilson thought it best if Mrs. Holloway stayed somewhere less conspicuous than her home, the doctor explained. The sheriff agreed. Zara looked uncomfortable, her eyes downcast. "I don't want to impose." "Nonsense," Martha declared, ushering her inside. "It's no imposition at all. Come in. I've just put on a fresh pot of coffee." Zachariah stood awkwardly in the parlor as Martha led Zara to the spare bedroom. Dr. Bennett lingered in the doorway. "She's been treated this way for some time," the doctor said quietly. "The bruises I've seen, well, they tell a story that Mrs. Holloway wouldn't." "And you did nothing?" Zachariah couldn't keep the accusation from his voice. Dr. Bennett sighed heavily. "I encouraged her to leave, offered to help. But these situations are complicated, Mr. Evans. Women like Mrs. Holloway have few options, especially with no family to return to." "That doesn't make it right," Zachariah insisted. "No," Dr. Bennett agreed. "It doesn't. Perhaps your intervention today was what she needed, what we all needed to face the truth." He placed his hat back on his head. "Good night, Mr. Evans. Take care of her." When Martha returned to the parlor, she found Zachariah staring out the window into the gathering darkness. "She's settled in," Martha informed him. "Scared half to death, but settled. I gave her one of my nightgowns and told her to rest. Poor thing looks like she hasn't slept properly in months." "What happens now?" Zachariah asked, more to himself than his sister. "Now we give her time," Martha replied, "and space to make her own decisions." "Frank won't just let her go," Zachariah said grimly. "Men like him view their wives as property." Martha's expression hardened. "Then we'll just have to show him that Zara Holloway belongs to herself and no one else." In the days that followed, Zachariah tried to maintain his distance, riding out early to his ranch to tend to his horses and cattle, returning to town only to check on Martha and their guest. But on his third visit, he found Zara sitting alone on the front porch, staring out at the mountains that cradled the valley. The bruises on her face had begun to fade, revealing high cheekbones and a natural beauty that had been hidden beneath fear and pain. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and she wore one of Martha's dresses, slightly too large for her slender frame. "Mr. Evans," she acknowledged as he approached, her voice soft but steadier than before. "I never properly thanked you." Zachariah removed his hat, uncomfortable with gratitude for what he considered basic human decency. "No thanks needed, Mrs. Holloway. Anyone would have done the same." "But they didn't," she pointed out, a hint of bitterness coloring her words. "For 2 years they didn't." He sat on the porch step, leaving a respectful distance between them. "Why did you stay?" he asked, then immediately regretted the question. I apologize. That's not my business. No, it's a fair question, Zara sighed. I came to America with dreams: a husband, a home, children someday. When I arrived and found Frank, different from his letters, I told myself it would get better. Then, when it got worse, I told myself I had nowhere else to go. She looked down at her hands, twisting a loose thread from her borrowed dress. The truth is, Mr. Evans, I was afraid. Of him, of being alone in a strange country, of what people would say. And now, Zachariah asked quietly, now I'm still afraid, she admitted. But for the first time in years, I'm also angry, and that feels stronger than the fear. The screen door opened, and Martha emerged with a tray of lemonade. Thought you two might be thirsty, she announced, setting the tray on the small porch table. It's a scorcher today. Zachariah accepted a glass gratefully. Any word from town? Martha's expression tightened. Frank was released yesterday. He's been telling anyone who'll listen that his wife's been stolen by the Evans siblings. Zara paled visibly. I should go. I'm causing you both trouble. You'll do no such thing, Martha declared firmly. Frank Holloway can talk until he's blue in the face. This is my home, and I decide who stays in it. Martha's right, Zachariah agreed. Besides, Frank would have to be a bigger fool than I'd take him for to try anything now. The sheriff's watching him, and so is half the town. The problem, Martha said, settling into her rocking chair, is what comes next. Zara and I have been discussing options. I want a divorce, Zara stated, lifting her chin with newfound resolve. I know it's uncommon and people will talk, but I can't go back to him. I won't. Zachariah nodded slowly. It won't be easy. Montana Territory doesn't grant divorces lightly, even in cases of cruelty. Judge Patterson's wife is in my quilting circle, Martha said thoughtfully. She's a sensible woman who's never much cared for Frank Holloway. Perhaps I could speak with her. And what will you do afterward? Zachariah asked Zara. Where will you go? Zara's resolve faltered momentarily. I haven't figured that part out yet. I have some skills. I can sew, cook, keep accounts. Perhaps I could find work in one of the larger towns. You could stay in Willow Creek, Martha suggested. The school needs a teacher's assistant. Miss Perkins has been asking for help with the younger children. People would never accept me, Zara said softly. Not after this. Some won't, Zachariah acknowledged. But others will surprise you. This town isn't perfect, but there are good people here who know right from wrong. As they spoke, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Sheriff Miller and 2 deputies rode up to Martha's gate, their expressions grim. Afternoon, Martha. Zachariah, the sheriff greeted, touching the brim of his hat. Mrs. Holloway. Sheriff, Martha replied cautiously. What brings you out this way? Sheriff Miller dismounted, leaving his deputies on their horses. Frank Holloway has filed charges against your brother for assault, and he's demanding his wife return home immediately. Zara stiffened beside Zachariah, her fingers clutching the porch railing until her knuckles whitened. I shot him because he was beating his wife, Zachariah stated calmly. If that's assault, then I'm guilty. And Mrs. Holloway is a grown woman who can decide for herself where she stays, Martha added firmly. The sheriff sighed, looking uncomfortable. I understand your position, but Frank's got Judge Bennett's ear. The judge has issued a summons for both of you to appear in court tomorrow. He turned to Zara. Mrs. Holloway, legally, you're still under your husband's authority, without a divorce decree. I am not property, Zara interrupted, her voice trembling but determined, and I will not return to that house to be beaten again. Sheriff Miller looked genuinely conflicted. Madam, I don't want to see you hurt, but the law... Sometimes the law is wrong, Sheriff, Zachariah said, standing, and when it is, people have to stand against it. The sheriff studied him for a long moment. You'll both need to be in court tomorrow at noon. I suggest you bring Dr. Bennett to testify about Mrs. Holloway's injuries. He turned to leave, then paused. And Zachariah, Frank's been drinking heavily and making threats. Watch your back. After the sheriff and his deputies rode away, a heavy silence fell over the porch. Finally, Martha broke it. Well, we knew this was coming, she said briskly. Zara, we'll need to find you something appropriate to wear to court. And Zachariah, you'd better dig out your Sunday suit. Zara looked bewildered by Martha's practical approach. "Aren't you worried? What if the judge orders me to return to Frank?" "Then we'll appeal," Martha replied simply. "Or we'll move to another territory where the laws are more favorable to women. Idaho, perhaps. I've always liked mountains." Despite the gravity of the situation, Zachariah found himself smiling at his sister's indomitable spirit. "Martha's right. This is just one battle. Whatever happens tomorrow, you're not alone anymore, Mrs. Holloway." Zara looked between the siblings, wonder and gratitude softening her features. "Please," she said quietly, "call me Zara." That night, unable to sleep, Zachariah sat on the front porch with his rifle across his lap. He didn't truly expect Frank to try anything, not with the sheriff watching, but he wouldn't take chances with the safety of the women inside. The door creaked open around midnight, and Zara stepped out, wrapped in a shawl against the night's chill. "You should be resting," Zachariah said gently. "Tomorrow will be difficult." "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, sitting beside him on the porch swing. "Every time I close my eyes, I see Frank's face when you shot him, the shock, the rage. He won't forgive either of us." "I'm not looking for his forgiveness," Zachariah replied. They sat in silence for a while. The only sounds the creaking of the swing and the distant calls of night creatures. "Why did you help me?" Zara finally asked. "Most men in town agree with Frank that what happens between a husband and wife is private business." Zachariah was quiet for so long that Zara thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low and filled with old pain. "My mother died when I was 12. My father remarried a year later, a young widow named Eliza. She was kind to Martha and me, treated us like her own children. But my father—" He stared out into the darkness. "He was a hard man who grew harder after Mother died. He began drinking, taking his frustrations out on Eliza." Zara's hand found his in the darkness, a gentle touch of understanding. "One night, it was particularly bad," Zachariah continued. "I tried to stop him, but I was just a boy. He knocked me aside and continued beating her. The next morning, she was gone. Left a note saying she couldn't live that way anymore. We never heard from her again." His voice tightened. 3 months later, my father died in a hunting accident. Martha and I were sent to live with our uncle. I've always wondered if Eliza might have stayed, if someone had stood up for her sooner. "It wasn't your fault," Zara said softly. "You were a child." "I know that now," he acknowledged, "but I promised myself I'd never stand by again when someone needed help, especially a woman suffering at the hands of a man who should protect her." Zara's fingers tightened around his. "Thank you for telling me, and for keeping that promise." In the silver moonlight, her face looked ethereal, the fading bruises barely visible. Zachariah felt a pull toward her that went beyond his sense of justice or duty, a connection he had no right to feel for a married woman, regardless of her circumstances. He gently withdrew his hand. "We should both try to rest. Tomorrow will come early enough." The following day, Willow Creek's small courthouse was packed to capacity. It seemed the entire town had turned out to witness the proceedings. Zachariah, Martha, and Zara arrived to find Frank already seated at the front with his lawyer, Mr. Blackwood, one of the most expensive attorneys in the territory. Dr. Bennett met them outside, agreeing to testify about Zara's injuries. Margaret Wilson also approached, surprising them all. "I've spoken with several women who've witnessed Frank's behavior over the past 2 years," she informed them quietly. 3 are willing to testify. Judge Patterson entered, silencing the murmuring crowd. A stern man in his 60s, he was known for his rigid interpretation of the law. Frank's case was presented first. Mr. Blackwood painted a picture of a hard-working husband whose authority had been undermined by an interfering cowboy with no respect for the sanctity of marriage. He described how Zachariah had shot an unarmed man in front of witnesses, endangering everyone on the street. When it was their turn, Zara's testimony silenced the courtroom. With quiet dignity, she described 2 years of escalating abuse beatings that left her unable to leave her bed, threats that kept her isolated and afraid. "On the day Mr. Evans intervened," she concluded, "my husband had dragged me from our home because I had spoken to Mrs. Wilson at the general store without his permission. He hit me repeatedly on the street, calling me worthless and threatening worse when we got home." She looked directly at the judge. If Mr. Evans hadn't stopped him, I believe my husband would have eventually killed me. Dr. Bennett confirmed her account, describing injuries he had treated over the past 2 years. 3 women from town testified to witnessing Frank's controlling and violent behavior, including an incident where he had dragged Zara from a church social by her hair. When Zachariah took the stand, he spoke plainly. I shot Frank Holloway because he was beating his wife in public, and no one else was stepping in to stop it. I aimed for his shoulder deliberately. I wanted to stop him, not kill him. And did you encourage Mrs. Holloway to leave her husband? Judge Patterson asked. I offered her safety, Zachariah corrected. The choice to leave was hers alone. Frank's face had grown increasingly red throughout the testimony. When the judge called a recess to consider his ruling, Frank stormed out of the courthouse, shouldering roughly past Zachariah. This isn't over, he hissed. The town buzzed with speculation during the hour-long recess. Opinions seemed divided, with some still insisting that a husband had the right to discipline his wife, while others were horrified by the details that had emerged. When court reconvened, Judge Patterson's expression was grave. This case presents complex questions of law and morality, he began. Mr. Evans, while your intentions may have been noble, taking the law into your own hands sets a dangerous precedent. For the charge of assault, I fine you $20. A murmur ran through the courtroom. The fine was nominal, far less than expected. As for Mrs. Holloway's situation, the judge continued, while the law grants significant authority to husbands, it does not sanction cruelty or abuse. I am granting Mrs. Holloway's petition for a legal separation with maintenance for a period of 6 months, during which time Mr. Holloway is ordered to have no contact with her. After 6 months, if the situation remains unchanged, Mrs. Holloway may petition for a full divorce on grounds of extreme cruelty. Frank leapt to his feet. This is outrageous. She's my wife. Sit down, Mr. Holloway, Judge Patterson ordered sharply. One more outburst, and I'll hold you in contempt. He turned back to Zara. Mrs. Holloway, you are free to reside wherever you choose during this period. The court orders Mr. Holloway to provide $10 monthly for your maintenance. I won't pay a cent to that ungrateful, Frank began. Bailiff, remove Mr. Holloway, the judge ordered, and add contempt of court to his troubles. As Frank was escorted out, still shouting threats, Zara sat very still, as if afraid that moving would somehow undo the judgment. It's over, Martha whispered, squeezing her hand. For now, at least. The crowd filed out slowly, some avoiding their eyes, others nodding in approval. Margaret Wilson approached them outside the courthouse. The school board meets tomorrow, she said to Zara. I've already spoken to most of the members about the assistant position. If you're interested, it's yours. Tears welled in Zara's eyes. Thank you, she managed. I don't know what to say. Say you'll join my quilting circle, Margaret replied with a smile. We meet on Thursdays. As they walked back to Martha's house, Zachariah kept a watchful eye out for Frank, but there was no sign of him. The town seemed to be returning to its normal rhythm, though he noticed people watching them, whispering as they passed. It will take time, Martha acknowledged, noticing his frown. People don't change their minds overnight, but they will, especially once they get to know Zara better. That evening, they celebrated the small victory with a special dinner. Martha had invited Dr. Bennett and Margaret Wilson, who brought her husband, the mayor. The conversation carefully avoided the day's events, focusing instead on town news, the upcoming harvest festival, and Martha's infamous apple pie. As the guests departed, Zachariah found himself alone with Zara, on the porch once more. The night was clear, stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds. What will you do now? He asked. Accept the teaching position, she replied without hesitation. Find a small place of my own. Begin again. She turned to face him. And you? Will you continue splitting your time between your ranch and Martha's spare room? For now, he said. At least until I'm sure Frank won't try anything foolish. You can't protect me forever, she pointed out gently. No, he agreed. But I can until you're steady on your feet again. Zara studied his face in the soft glow from the house windows. Why do I feel like there's something you're not saying, Mr. Evans? Zachariah hesitated. Because there is, he finally admitted. But it wouldn't be right to say it, not yet. Maybe not ever. Understanding dawned in her eyes. Because I'm still married. Legally separated, he corrected with a small smile. But yes, and because you need time to heal, to find out who Zara Holloway is when she's free to make her own choices. She nodded slowly. That's surprisingly wise. I have my moments, he quipped. Well then, she said, I suppose we'll both just have to be patient and see what the future holds. The 6 months of legal separation passed more quickly than anyone anticipated. Zara thrived in her position at the school, her natural affinity for children, making her a favorite among students and parents alike. She found a small cottage to rent near the schoolhouse and gradually replaced the few possessions she'd left behind at Frank's house. Frank himself remained a shadow over her new beginning. Though he kept his distance as ordered, there were occasional reports of him watching her from afar or making bitter remarks about her in the saloon. He refused to pay the court-ordered maintenance, forcing Zara to rely entirely on her teaching salary. Zachariah returned primarily to his ranch, but made frequent trips to town, ostensibly to visit Martha or purchase supplies. If those visits often coincided with the end of the school day when Zara walked home alone, neither of them commented on the coincidence. Their friendship deepened gradually over shared cups of coffee on Martha's porch, conversations about books and ideas, and quiet walks on Sunday afternoons. Zachariah was careful to maintain proper boundaries, mindful that Zara was still legally married and vulnerable, but he couldn't deny the growing attachment between them, a connection built on mutual respect and understanding. As the 6-month mark approached, tension returned to Willow Creek. Frank made it known throughout town that he expected his wife to return once the separation ended, boasting that she would come crawling back when she realized how difficult life was without a husband's support. A week before Zara was to appear before Judge Patterson to request a divorce, disaster struck. She was walking home from school when Frank stepped out from between 2 buildings, blocking her path. "You're looking well, wife," he said, his voice slurred from drink despite the early hour. "Better than you deserve, after what you've done to my reputation." Zara stood her ground, though her heart raced. "Please step aside, Frank. The court order is still in effect." He moved closer. "For 1 more week, then you're coming home, where you belong." "I'm never coming back," she replied firmly. "I've filed for divorce." Frank's face contorted with rage. No woman leaves Frank Holloway, especially not for some saddle tramp who thinks he's a hero. "This isn't about Mr. Evans," Zara insisted. "It's about me not wanting to be beaten anymore." Frank lunged suddenly, grabbing her arm with bruising force. "You ungrateful! Let her go." Zachariah's voice cut through the confrontation like a knife. He stood a few yards away, hand resting on his holstered gun. "The restraining order is still in effect, Frank." "You're breaking the law?" Frank sneered but released Zara's arm. "Always showing up to play the hero, Evans. Does it make you feel like a big man, coveting another man's wife?" "Go home, Frank," Zachariah replied evenly. "You're drunk and you're making a fool of yourself." Frank's hand moved toward his belt, where Zachariah knew he carried a knife. "Maybe it's time someone taught you to mind your own business." Before he could draw the weapon, Sheriff Miller appeared around the corner. "That's enough, Holloway. You're coming with me." Frank glared at them all, but backed down in the face of the sheriff's authority. "This isn't over," he spat before allowing himself to be led away. That evening, as Zachariah walked Zara home, the tension of the afternoon hung between them. "He'll try again," Zara said quietly. "He's always been stubborn, but now it's about pride. He can't bear that I left him, that people know why." "The divorce hearing is in a week," Zachariah reminded her. "Once it's granted, you'll be free of him legally." "But not really," she sighed. "Not as long as we live in the same town." They reached her cottage, stopping at the gate. Lamplight glowed warmly through the curtained windows, and flowers she'd planted in the spring bloomed along the short walkway. It was a modest home, but unmistakably hers. "Have you considered leaving Willow Creek?" Zachariah asked, voicing the question that had troubled him for weeks. Zara looked up at him, moonlight silvering her dark hair. "I've built something here, Zachariah. Friends, a position I enjoy, a life of my own making. I don't want Frank to take that from me, too. And if he doesn't give you a choice, if he keeps making threats..." She was quiet for a moment, considering. Then I suppose I would have to leave, start over somewhere else. The thought of her leaving twisted painfully in Zachariah's chest. I would miss you, he admitted softly. Zara's eyes softened. Would you? Enough to consider other options? What do you mean? He asked. I mean, she said carefully, that there might be a future where neither of us has to leave Willow Creek, but we also don't have to fear Frank's anger. Hope stirred in Zachariah's heart, but he tempered it with caution. Zara, I've tried to be respectful of your situation. I haven't wanted to pressure you or complicate things when you were still finding your footing. I know, she said, a smile touching her lips, and I've appreciated that more than you know. But I'm not the broken woman you rescued 6 months ago, Zachariah. I know my own mind now. And my heart. He took a step closer. And what does your heart tell you? That life is too short to waste being afraid, she answered. That sometimes the most unexpected encounters can lead to the greatest happiness. She reached for his hand. That I've fallen in love with a cowboy who believed I deserved better when no one else did. Zachariah's breath caught. Zara, are you sure? Once your divorce is final? I'm sure, she interrupted gently. I've been sure for months, but I needed to be certain I was choosing you because of who you are, not because you rescued me. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. And are you certain? Completely, she whispered. I love you for your kindness, your patience, your strength. For the man who sits with Martha every evening playing chess even though she always beats you. For the way you treat everyone with respect, regardless of their station. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. For believing I was worth fighting for when I'd forgotten it myself. Zachariah drew her closer, his free hand gently cupping her cheek. I love you, Zara Holloway. I have since that first day on Martha's porch when you spoke of being angry rather than afraid. Their first kiss was gentle, a promise of tenderness to replace the harshness she had known. When they parted, both were smiling despite the challenges that still lay ahead. 1 week, Zachariah said, after the divorce is final, we can begin to build something together, if that's what you want. It is, she assured him, though Frank won't make it easy. Few things worth having come easily, he replied, but we'll face it together. The divorce hearing arrived with a sense of inevitability. Frank appeared with a new lawyer, attempting to contest the divorce on grounds that Zara had abandoned her marital duties. But, faced with the testimony about his abuse and his recent violation of the restraining order, Judge Patterson was unmoved. The court grants Mrs. Holloway's petition for divorce on grounds of extreme cruelty, he declared. Mr. Holloway will pay court costs and a settlement of $100 to Mrs. Holloway in lieu of ongoing support. Frank stormed from the courthouse, his face dark with fury. Zachariah stayed close to Zara as they left, watchful for any sign of trouble. It came 3 days later. Zachariah rode into town to find Zara's cottage in flames, smoke billowing into the clear autumn sky. A crowd had gathered, passing buckets of water in a desperate attempt to control the blaze, but it was clear the small house would be a total loss. He found Zara with Martha, watching from across the street, her face streaked with soot and tears. Are you hurt? He demanded, dismounting and rushing to her side. She shook her head. I wasn't home. I was at the school preparing lessons. Her voice broke. Everything I had is in there, Zachariah. Everything I've built since leaving Frank. Things can be replaced, he said firmly. You can't. Sheriff Miller approached, his expression grim. 3 witnesses saw Frank near the cottage shortly before the fire started. I've sent deputies to bring him in. But Frank Holloway had disappeared, taking what money he had and fleeing town. Some said he'd headed west to California. Others claimed he'd gone north to the gold fields. Wherever he'd gone, his final act of revenge had left Zara homeless once more. In the aftermath, the town of Willow Creek surprised them both. Families from the school brought clothing and household items to replace what Zara had lost. The quilting circle presented her with a new quilt, each square sewn by a different woman. Anne Margaret Wilson organized a collection to help Zara find new housing. I never expected this, Zara confessed to Zachariah as they sorted through the donations. After everything that happened, the way people talked. People can change, he replied. Sometimes they just need to see the truth clearly enough. 2 weeks after the fire, Zachariah asked Zara to ride with him out to his ranch. It was a modest property, a small but solid house, a barn, and enough grazing land for his small herd of cattle. Wildflowers still bloomed in patches across the rolling hills, and the mountains provided a stunning backdrop against the clear blue sky. "It's beautiful," Zara said as they sat on the porch, drinking coffee. "Peaceful. It could use a woman's touch," Zachariah ventured, "and it's far enough from town that no one would bother us, but close enough for you to continue teaching." Zara set down her cup, turning to face him fully. "Zachariah Evans, are you asking me something specific?" He smiled, reaching for her hand. "I am. Zara Holloway, I know it hasn't been long since your divorce, and I would understand if you wanted to wait, but I love you and I want to build a life with you here, if you'll have it, if you'll have me." Tears filled her eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, to all of it." They were married a month later in Martha's parlor, with Judge Patterson officiating and half the town in attendance. Margaret Wilson stood as Zara's matron of honor, and Dr. Bennett as Zachariah's best man. Zara wore a new dress of pale blue silk, her dark hair adorned with wildflowers. "I never thought I'd find happiness again," she whispered to Zachariah as they shared their first dance as husband and wife, "especially not in Willow Creek, where everything went so wrong." "Sometimes," he replied, drawing her closer, "things have to go wrong before they can go right." As they moved across the floor, surrounded by friends who had become family, the whispers of the past faded away. No one said she deserved what happened anymore. Instead, they celebrated two people who had found love in the most unexpected circumstances, a woman who had reclaimed her strength and a cowboy who had stood up for what was right when it mattered most. Years later, when their children asked how they met, Zachariah would tell them it began with words that changed everything. "No woman deserves pain." And Zara would add that it continued with words that healed everything. "You deserve love." Together, they had built a life that proved both statements true.